Hello again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us again today for our 10-minute Bible lesson. Can you spare 10 minutes? I appreciate it if you could. We've been doing a new lessons, new studies. We've been doing studies out of the book of Psalms. And what we're doing is just kind of going and picking out some Psalms, different Psalms, and choosing a few verses out of those Psalms and making comments on them. And that's what we're going to do today. Last week we had Psalm 1. Today we're going to talk about the first 5 verses in Psalm 2. And then I'm thinking that next week we're going to be looking at Psalm 19, which is an outstanding psalm. But let's read in Psalm chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. It's kind of a different psalm. It's kind of unusual. Let's listen to what it says. Why do the nations rage and the people plot a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, this is what they say, let us break their bonds in pieces and cast away their cords from us. Now, this psalm begins with a question. And the question is why? Now, the question's not if, but the question is why. Why do the people of this world and the rulers have a constant desire to pull away from the one who created them? It's just a great question to think about. It's an excellent question to think about. You see this world that we live in, and its philosophy has an animus against God and against his truth. So let's just be honest about it and not deny that there is an antagonism that exists between God and this world. And frankly, it's actually, if you could say that it's always been there. So let's don't deny that. So the psalmist, he asks this question. Why do the nations rage, or why are they tumultuous? And why do they plan things that are vain? Or why do they do those things that they agree together to be against the Lord and against the counsel of God? In fact, their counsel, you might say, contradicts the ways of the Lord. And I noticed something else about this psalm that I thought was interesting. So it says that the kings of the earth set themselves and their rulers take counsel together against the Lord. But notice it says, and against his anointed. Now, I wonder what that means. Well, I can just say this, that the word Messiah actually means the anointed one. The Greek word for anointed is the word Christ. So I thought that was interesting. That who are they setting themselves up against? Well, they're setting themselves up against the Lord and his anointed. And who is his anointed? Well, it's Christ. So you could almost say that there exists a spirit in this world that is anti-Christ. So that's what this verse right here says. So you might ask this question, what is it exactly that they take counsel together about? What exactly are their plans? And, this is what it actually is, if you just want to get right down to it. It's how they may disassociate themselves from God and from his ways. In fact, they do this by saying this, let us break that which bonds us with God. Let us throw away those things that connect us with him. So it's really a great question to ponder and to think about. Why does this happen? You wouldn't think that people would want to separate themselves from the one who loves us the most. I mean, God is the one who loves us the most. It's just a strange, weird thing, the way that we are. Why would you be against the person that cares the most about us? Well, I think that it's interesting that it's been going along a long time, even as far back as Adam and Eve. You know, when Adam and Eve sinned and they disobeyed God in the garden, two things happened. The first thing that it says after they sinned, it says that they hid themselves. And you know, when I was thinking about this, when they were hiding themselves, it made me think what they did was actually go in the opposite direction of God. They went away from God. They ran away from God. And then the second thing that they did, the Bible says that they sewed fig leaves to cover themselves. And I thought that was kind of interesting too, because you could say it was the first big cover up. So that it's been going on ever since Adam and Eve. So we, that is to say humanity, we've been in our hearts in opposition against God ever since. In fact, he's gone to great lengths to reconcile us. I mean, he even went so far to send the very best thing that was in heaven, and that was his only son, his one and only son. He sent down here to bring us back together. So I think that's a you might want to ask this question. Well, why is that? Why does that exist, and why does it happen? And it just has to do with what's within us as human beings. It's in our own nature to be that way. We just are sinful, and we just have a nature to want to, instead of run to God, we want to run away from God. And another thing that I thought was interesting, especially that phrase, let me see, it says, "Let us break their bonds in pieces and cast away their cords from us." And you know, I've been around a long time, and I've seen a lot of things that have changed in this country. Listen, I remember in grade school, we had prayer in school. And if I'm not mistaken, we were taught the Ten Commandments. And that was really, really an important thing. Imagine that. Wouldn't that be a horrible thing that could be done today? Something like that? I mean, it would just be outrageous. I mean, the first thing they did, they said, no, we can't do that. We can't have prayer anymore in school. And now look at our educational institutions from the bottom all the way to the top. What a mess! What a mess, and what a things they're teaching. And then the next thing they said, listen, we have got to get the Ten Commandments and anything that has to do with the God of the Bible out of the public square. And so, and that's in a sense that's not something that's new, because the psalmist said this. He said, "Let us break their bonds in pieces and cast away their cords from us." And you know, there's a correlation. Like I said, I've been here long enough to be able to see that in this country, that the when we began to kind of push God and disassociate ourselves from Him, that things began to go downhill. Now, listen, those things happened a long time ago, but listen, look where we're at now. Look at the things that are going on now. I mean, there are things that people are thinking and believing that I would have not ever imagined would happen. So I believe there's a correlation from that. So let's look at the last two verses. I mean, the verses 4 and 5. We're going to cover 5 verses, but let's look at the last two we're going to cover. And that's in Psalm 2, 4, and 5. So here's God's response to all of that. Look what it says. It says, "He who sits in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall hold them in derision. Then he shall speak to them in his wrath and distress them in his deep displeasure." Now that's interesting. There's a couple of words that I picked up on this that I thought was interesting. What will God do? Well, first, and now God doesn't laugh at our sorrows and our sufferings. Believe me, God does not like that. But I think that somehow God just thinks about how we do and the silliness of things that we do, because He gives us a free will and allows us to make our own decision. And sometimes, I mean, when it opposes the things that it's good for us, it's almost in some ways funny. I mean, it's funny and yet it's not funny. But there's two things in this verse that he says that I thought that was interesting. Number one, he said he would hold them in derision. And number two, he would distress them. So just think about that. So when you hold someone in derision, what you're doing is that you kind of you scoff, you ridicule. So I think what this means is what God is doing is He allows people when they make decisions like that to move away from God to become in a state of ridicule. That is to say, they become ridiculous. And the things that we hear today and see today, I scratch my head and I say, that's ridiculous. It just doesn't make sense. But it's the fruit of our own decisions. And then it says this, that He will have us in distress. Have you ever seen more distress than we're having today? And so I just think it's kind of interesting. So the world's opposition to God is both sad and in some ways it's kind of humorous at the same time. You see, we weren't created to exist apart from God. It was never God's plan and purpose for us to live on our own, away from the dependence of God. So we're made to be with God and to have God in our life. And when that happens, good things happen. We realize a life of fulfillment, a life of purpose, and a life of joy when we have our connection with Him. So it's just a bad mistake to try to separate us from Him. So let's just say a little prayer. Let's just say, dear God, give us a heart that loves You and loves Your ways. It would be so much better for us. Hey, listen, thank you for tuning in for our little lesson today. Hope you have a good week. Join us next week, please.